Going to take a look at Ryan. Ryan will be entering high school next year, and we're going to be looking at some of the early phases of his pitching. I'm not going to look at the later part of this at this time, just basically looking at how he starts his pitch. This was taken at a bullpen session. I'm not exactly sure if this is the way he pitches in a game, but I've made the assumption that it is, in fact, the way he pitches in a game. Three positions here. The one on the left shows him as he starts his windup. Middle is when the leg is coming up, and then the last one, maybe the most important one, is as the front foot lands, the foot plants of the front leg, and the position of the arm, the high cocked position, ready to then rotate the body and then release the ball, throwing to the plate. I brought in a major leaguer here to take a look at least one attribute, and from the middle picture, I've drawn a red line right from the toe, pointing in the direction that the pitch would go, and in the blue line would be the back foot heel. So what I'm trying to do here is try to set up a target zone for the front foot and where the front foot lands. You can see on the rightmost picture, the major leaguer's front foot lands pretty much in between those two lines, which is kind of what you'd really like to see in a pitcher. You don't want to see the foot too far off from the sort of goalpost positions. Adding those lines onto Ryan and taking into account the direction that this film was taken. This film was not taken directly behind the catcher. It's a little bit to the side. So you have to take into account that. You can see that Ryan's front foot is landing quite a bit to the left of the red line. Probably something that he could work on. I think it'll help him in ways that I'll show in a second. But it's sort of the first thing I noticed when I looked at this picture of Ryan. To give a sort of a schematic view of where I've noticed good pitchers landing their front foot. Here's a picture of the back foot is up on top, somewhere on the rubber. I really don't care where in the rubber, but someplace on the rubber. Again, drawing those two lines kind of sets up the goalpost for where the front foot, the lower foot, should try to land. If you're in those two lines, you probably do pretty well. Try to avoid landing too far over to the left in the red zone. I think trying to get it even closer to the heel line, the blue line, is probably the very best, the blue zone. But again, somewhere in that zone is a good thing. And just taking a look at Ryan versus Sandy Koufax, and probably a bit unfair to compare any young player to Sandy Koufax, but this Koufax picture is very nice and shows a couple of things that I'll explain a little bit more. And then on the schematic, I try to show how Koufax lands, and I've looked at other video of him, and his front foot lands close or even to the right of that heel line, so he's really landing in an open position. And with Ryan, you can see his front foot is probably landing in that red zone over to the left of his toe line. He's landing very closed, and that kind of forces him to kind of throw around his body. You imagine you're kind of landing in that direction. You got to rotate from here on out. You almost have to go around that front foot. Now, I will say there are some major leaguers that do have their front foot kind of in that yellow zone or slightly to the right, but not to the extent that Ryan has. So I think it would help him if he tries to pull back that foot, get it so he lands more open, and it'll be iterative, but I would say start to get that position to be improved. Very easy way to do that is when you're taking some bullpen sessions or you're practicing, just take your bat and scratch out the toe line from where your back foot starts. Draw that line straight toward the catcher, and as you pitch, try to see where you're landing. Try to get it back to the toe line at least, and maybe within the toe line to bring it back to where it should be. This positioning that he's doing, that position to be improved. Very easy way to do that is when you're taking some bullpen sessions or you're practicing, just take your bat and scratch out the toe line from where your back foot starts. Draw that line straight toward the catcher, and as you pitch, try to see where you're landing. Try to get it back to the toe line at least, and maybe within the toe line to bring it back to where it should be. Another important thing to notice here is the angle or the orientation that the front foot has here, comparing Ryan to the major leaguer. Most major leaguers, as you can see here with Koufax, have that front foot pointed straight toward the catcher. It's not off on much of an angle. With Ryan, you can see it's pivoted quite a bit, probably 45 degrees relative to the catcher or the pitch direction. So again, he wants to get that foot aligned with the pitch direction. That'll also align his front leg with the pitch direction. His positioning that he's doing also brings up a few other points. And here let's start with Koufax. I think Koufax, again, this is why I like this picture, taken directly from behind the plate. You can see that foot plant, again, both of these are taken at the same point in the pitch. Koufax's hips are already rotated toward the catcher, probably 30, 40, 45 degrees. So the hips go way out in front of the chest or the shoulder line. You can see here the chest is pointing directly to the side. So his shoulders are directly in line with the pitch direction. And because of that, you can see that there's a pretty good angle that exists between the chest and the hips. It's probably, like I said, 30 to 45 degrees, probably, quite a bit. Now, looking at Ryan, he does not have that big separation between the chest and the hips. They're both almost pointing in the same direction. And not only that, but they're kind of pointing back, the hips particularly. If you look at the hips, they're not at all pointing toward the plate. They're actually kind of counter-rotated backwards, pointing slightly to the third base side. And the chest likewise is rotated back. But the two angles between the chest, so the angle between the chest and the hips is very small. There's not a separation like you see with Sandy Koufax. Now, I have heard some pitching coaches or seen videos where coaches say that the pitcher should land the front foot and then rotate the hips. I don't agree with that. When you look at pitchers in the major leagues, their hips are rotating as their front foot is landing. So by the time their front foot is sort of planted, the hips have already rotated quite a bit toward the catcher. However, the chest does not. There's quite a bit of separation between the two. That's a little different than batting. Batting, the hips and the chest are more tightly linked. But in pitching, the hips do, in fact, get way ahead of the chest. So that's something, as Ryan pulls that foot back into the correct zone, I think that'll help with the chest and the hip orientation. But I think he should try to think about rotating those hips as he lands. Another thing that you might notice here, imagine you were the catcher behind catching Ryan's pitch. Again, you'd be a little bit more to the right due to the angle of the video. I would bet that if you were the catcher looking at Ryan right now, you would be able to read the back number on his jersey. So if he's number 30, I think you'd be able to see that 30. That's because his chest is rotated or his shoulders are rotated away from the catcher. Looking at Koufax, you can see there's no way you could read his number on the back of his jersey. His hips being rotated and his chest being oriented the way it is would prevent you from seeing that. So again, with Ryan, I would say that that's another indication of not quite having the quite best rotation and positions as his foot is planting. And again, just looking at Sandy Koufax, he just looks like everything's in line. I mean, his leg, his front leg, his foot, his shoulders, he's all lined up ready to throw that ball straight to the plate. With the younger player, it almost looks like he's not pitching toward, at least in this picture, he's not really throwing toward the catcher. It almost looks like he's throwing well to the side, to the third base side. And again, that is forcing him to kind of rotate around his own body to get the ball to the plate. And I think a better lining up with the pitch direction would certainly help him a lot. Again, I mentioned before how it's pretty common that the pitchers you see in the major league, they do rotate their hips prior to their front foot landing. And here's a pitch and a major league pitcher, Lee, showing how as his foot is coming down, he's rotating the hips. The hips are not, and then they continue to rotate after the foot lands, but there's a considerable amount of rotation that happens prior to that front foot landing. And this picture is kind of nice. These two pictures that you can see how he rotates his hip toward the catcher, how the front leg and the foot are pointing to the catcher. He locates his front foot near the back heel line, so that blue line, he opens it up pretty well. And in the right-hand pitch, you can see how his shoulders are pointing toward the catcher also. So much similar to what we saw with Sandy Koufax, his alignment. And finally, just something I noticed. I don't know if this is something intentional or if he does this in all of his games, or maybe his coach was trying something. But I noticed as he's beginning his windup and before he sets his back foot, he slides that foot quite a bit over basically the whole length of the rubber. So I put a red dot on his back foot heel, and you can see that as he's getting into his windup, he just slides that foot all the way over across the pitching rubber. It's not something I can say I've really seen. I don't know exactly where this came from or why he's doing it. Maybe there's some advantage. I don't know, but it's definitely unusual. I think it adds a lot of extra motion to the windup that I don't see the reason for. For a major leaguer, what you typically see, here's Derek Lowe. Very typically, the front foot is lifted, but the back leg just kind of rotates around the toe. It doesn't slide along the rubber. I would say that that's a pretty typical way that major leaguers take their back foot and set it for the pitch.